Well, good afternoon. How's everybody doing today?
Great.
Great, fantastic. Of course, we're in Vegas, man. Let's go. This is a party town. Well, sort of. In any event, my name is Garrett Sirac. I am the Community Program Manager for Identity with Microsoft. My job is, I work on the product team for CardSpace. My job is not to actually manufacture code or to help them actually develop it. My job is to essentially make the Kool-Aid easier to drink. So I'm here to help you understand what it is we do and how to make it work. So for a very long time, things related to authentication really haven't changed or undergone very much of a transformation. Since the very first computer systems came about and we needed to do authentication, that is, allow someone to access it and essentially articulate who they are and prove it, things haven't really changed much. And so I've actually got a video that we dug out of some archive footage at Microsoft, which is, potentially, I think, one of the very earliest experiences where you can see authentication in action. So for those of you who actually used BBS systems back in the 80s, I'm sure you look at that and goes, yeah, that's exactly the way it looked. Essentially, we used a username and a password, and we got in and did something. What's really kind of disturbing is that, really, how much has that actually changed? Well, at the core, very, very little. We still have an identifier. We still have something that is a shared secret between the two of us. That is, that I have a piece of information that I have to then replay to the site. And while that's, works on a general basis, there is obviously a lot of downsides to that. The upside, of course, is the graphics nowadays are a little bit better. So we're getting some good traction with that. So let's talk about that shared secret concept for a minute. I have a piece of information, and in order to get access to something, I have to give it to you. Well, how many people in this room have more than, say, or who have less than 5 or so passwords they use everywhere? Well, the vast majority of us, come on, you all know you do. Most people, well, maybe not in this room, okay, but most people actually in general use between 2 to 3 passwords on every single system they use. Sure, they'll tack on an extra character here or there, but a really complicated, a really successful phishing site will actually be able to pull out several of those and understand the pattern that people have been using in order to actually use that and then go off and attack more sites. So the concept that we actually have to share a secret, the minute you share a secret, it's gone. And the other guy has it, and now he can do with it exactly as you have. And so we really need to look at, well, is there something we can do about shared secrets? And I got another video here that we dug out. Turns out that MGM did some work back in the 80s on this, and they actually have something else that I wanted to show you as well. So as we saw, the concept of having that shared secret obviously will allow anyone that has it in order to act on behalf of whoever it's supposed to be. In this case, Matthew Broderick goes ahead and he gets his access to the computer system that controls the student grades, and rather than actually trying hard, just obviously gives himself the grade he desires. Now that's obviously, on the grand scale of things, very small, but the potential for abuse is, well, very, 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 very large. As you well know, phishing attempts have gone through the roof in the last few years, to the point where I don't think a single day goes by, heck, I don't think a single hour goes by anymore where I don't get at least 1 or 2 phishing emails in my general email account. I mean, it's just ridiculous. This stuff has to stop. Well, and how do we stop that? Oh, forgot the other things. What have we learned? Well, number one, passwords shouldn't be words like pencil, and perhaps writing them down in a commonly accessible place isn't the wisest move. At least we don't echo the letters back to the screen anymore, obviously, so that's an improvement over the past. But again, where's that accountability? Who's actually going to verify that this stuff is actually correct? So what I'm going to show you right now is how CardSpace works and how it looks like on a website. So I'm going to briefly just give you a quick demo, if this works. Okay, so I've got myself a sample website here. It's just a basic blogging site or something like that. And I've been coming here for a long time, and I've already got an account, and I've signed up. So I'm just going to go and show you how you actually sign into a site with this. So here you can see I've got this sign in. I can either use my existing credentials for my username and password, which I signed up with a long time ago, or I can simply present my information card. So I click on the button, and my poor little laptop comes up, and we see CardSpace come up. So the first thing you notice is actually the display is actually dimmed around this, and we have a completely different window come up over top of the browser. And this is what's called the identity selector. This is where I store my digital identities. This is a place where I can have all of my identities in a singular place and be able to manage them as I see fit. This does not run on the desktop with the rest of the software. It does not have, does not run as the user. This actually runs as a protected system account on a private desktop. Similar to the way that you hit Control-Alt-Delete and you see the change password dialog come up, that's running in a separate protected desktop as well. Excuse me. So in this case, I've got a card here, and I'm going to simply just click on it, and I'm going to click Send. And so that sends the information from that card to the website, and it's logged me in. Well, it's not really clear from what I just did is how it did that, but we'll get around to that in a moment. The great part is, though, is I didn't have to remember a password. I didn't have to type something in, and I knew what was going on when it happened. So let me sign out for a moment. And I'm going to quickly show you how easy it is to sign up with that. So I'm going to click on that Sign In with Your Information Card button again. Rather than actually give it the information card that I currently have, let's quickly create one. So I'm actually going to go Add a Card and create a personal card. So I'm going to create a personal card. And a personal card is an identity that I define myself. It's something that I'm self-asserting all of the information in here. So I'm going to go and type in a new one, Garrett's new card. We'll even choose a nice little picture to go in the front of that. And we'll go back to my pictures, if I can find it. Oh, there we go. And I'll just pick a pretty picture of a green sea turtle. And so I'm going to type in the information. And this is similar to the same information that you're already asking for on a website. Oh, except I'm actually going to use my name. And we're going to go and type that in. Now I'm going to click Save, and so it's saved this card to my identity selector. So what you see here, so I can now submit this card to the website. So I'm going to click on Send. Before it allows me to send this card to this website, because I've never sent this card before, it's going to actually verify that I want to send this information and tell me what information I'm going to send. So you can see, barely from the screen, I guess it's a little small in there, it's asking for my first name, my last name, my email address, and something called a site-specific card ID. And what that site-specific card ID, it's actually a distillation of something that you can't see, which is something we call a PPID, or a private personal identifier. With every single card you create, it creates some new entropy inside that card, which we just call the master key. And every time I take this card to a different site, it takes the public key, the certificate from the website, and mixes information from that certificate and this entropy and creates two things. It creates a PPID, which is unique to that one site. So if I decide to send this card to another site later on, it's actually going to generate a different PPID. And we'll come back to exactly why that's handy. The second thing it does is actually generate an RSA key pair. And the reason it does that is so that it can actually sign the message that it's sending to the relying party, that is the website. When it does that, the relying party can take note of that PPID and the fact that it's signed, and then compare that on every return trip that I come back and present those same credentials. So when I've got something unique, that is the PPID, which is essentially a 40-character random string and a cryptographically signed token, you can then have a strong assurance that it's the same person coming back every single time. The claims that I've actually typed in, that is my name and email address and those things, you don't actually get verification of those, but you don't have those today either. Unless, of course, you do things like verify the email address via sending an email. I'm going to turn around and send this card right away. Hopefully my laptop wakes up a little. Hello? There we go. Okay, so now I've presented this card to this website. I have yet not given them any other information than the information in that card. So it looks at it and says, oh, well, that's great. I don't know who you are. It says, Garrett, thank you for presenting your card. Would you like to? And then first thing is associate your card with an existing account. So if I've already got an existing account, and I'm sure most of you who are running websites have a lot of users with existing accounts, you're going to want to be able to support the ability for them to associate a card with that account. The next thing I can do is create an account, or of course I can return to the page. So I'm actually going to create an account here. And it says, so an email has been sent to your account at my email address. Please follow the instructions in the message to access your account. So because I didn't want to set up an SMTP server for this demo, I'm just going to click on here and we can see the supposed email message, which of course is just saying a request has been made to create an account. It's just your standard verification of the email address. So I'm going to click on the link, and it takes me back and says, oh, show me a card again. The reason we do this is so that we can close the gap on being able to present one card and then verify that email address, and then they slip in a different card under the sheets. So I present the card, and my poor little hot laptop is gasping. So I click on the same card, and I send that again, and it has signed me up. It says, you have signed up, you've created an account with an information card. Next time you visit, you can sign in quickly and securely using that same card. So now, rather than having to type a username and a password or even type in data in order to create my account, I've been able to create an account by simply just clicking on a few mouse clicks using a card that I have, or had. In this case, I actually created it on the fly. But you can store all your cards and reuse them at site after site after site. So the question then, of course, is, well, what happens if I lose that card? And so let's get rid of that for a moment. So I'm going to sign out from there. And I'm going to go back and I'm going to say, sorry, I'm going to go to don't have your card. So I'm going to come back to this website, and I don't have my card with me. And this is what we call the recovery scenario. And so again, I can present an information card. So I'm going to present this information card. I'm going to quickly create a duplicate of that card. When I duplicate it, however, it won't use the same PPID. It'll actually create a new one. Okay, here we go. I'm going to quickly just duplicate this card. And we're just going to...
What circumstances did you lose your card?
Well, one, my computer got hit by a meteor. That's always my favorite one where it happens.
This is on your local machine. You can even do a different machine.
Yeah, so you could also do this from a different machine. This allows you to do roaming without actually having to physically export those cards and take them with you, which is one of the methods we can do roaming. In this particular case, we call it lost card, but it could be I just simply want to register an additional card with my account. And that's what I'll do right now. So I hit save on that one, and I'm going to send this one. And so again, it's going to verify my email address. And the reason it's doing this, of course, is the standard way of verifying whether I own that account or not. Since that's the only piece of verified information that I've given it before, it can readily know that if I prove myself again with that same email address, that I own control of that account, and therefore I can use that as authentication. So I'm going to quickly click on that, click on the link, again, present that same card. Now it looks like I'm presenting these cards a lot, but in reality, you wouldn't have to keep creating new cards constantly. Okay, so there I go. So now I've signed in and I've recovered access to my account. If I've lost a card and wish to remove it, I can go to my account page and actually remove that. If I go and look very quickly, we can see that I actually have now 2 cards associated with my account. We're going to come back to what some of this stuff means in a bit. Now I'm going to actually move back. Okay, so if you've got keyloggers on your box, the part of the strategy for mitigation of attacks with CardSpace is that it runs in a separate desktop process. And so the only keyloggers that are going to be actually able to see that separate desktop process are going to be ones running at the kernel level, which increases the bar significantly. But let's even assume that's not something that you can stop or that we should completely ignore. In this particular case, I didn't actually have to type anything in. Right? So a keylogger is actually going to get stopped by the fact that there's nothing to see. If they do have access to my email address, then they are going to have access to my account, which would happen today in most situations. So if you're going to use email address as a method for account confirmation, you'd better accept the risk that that's how much security that we're actually putting behind the system. If you want to have a stronger form of authentication, then you could certainly add that on the top as well. Additional questions, things like, when was the last time you logged in? Tell me about how much, if it was a bank or something like that, you could talk about their account details and have them answer questions on those types of things. Okay. So instead of using shared secrets to authenticate, we can actually use cryptography. That is, I was able to log in, I was able to authenticate myself, identify who I am, but I did not have to use a password. Therefore, the website now does not have the information they need to impersonate me. So even if that website gets co-opted, they can't take the same information and go to a different website and pretend they're me. And this is really, really, really fantastic for your users. At the point in time when they have a lot less to worry about leakage when a particular site gets hacked or whatever, that's very, very strong. Works for me. So the PPIDs are unique to the user and the website relationship. So for every card I create, and for every website that I visit with that same card, I actually get a different PPID and a different key pair. And that's how we actually maintain the ability to use it everywhere, but not be able to be impersonated. So websites can have a common, consistent user experience. How many people have seen different ways to use a username and password on a website? Some of you click on something, it pops down. I mean, it's just ridiculous, the different kinds of ways that you can see this thing. And then finally, to reduce drop-off with a simple sign-up. Does anybody here care about drop-off? Does it irritate anybody? Yeah, somebody it does. I keep leaving carts behind places, and I keep getting emails the next day. Drop-off, of course, is very, very bad for most commercial websites. If somebody starts to do a transaction and walks away because, oh, I didn't want to fill in a bunch of details. Oh, I didn't want to create a new account because it takes time. Or I didn't want to do this, that, the other thing. This will slow down people's ability, well, to shop at your website. I mean, even if you increase sales by a mere 1% based on that alone, that's pretty significant. So how do you go about actually enabling support for information cards in your website? If anybody has been looking at the stuff that I posted on our community website in the last year, it's all pretty low level, and you have to put a whole bunch of object tag stuff in your web pages, and you still have no clue as to how to actually deal with this thing. So I've actually spent the last 6 months on a project where we did a lot of user testing. We did a tremendous amount of work to come up with here's exactly how, kind of what we call it's basically a prescriptive guidance that tells us how we should make this stuff look, how it should behave, and what kinds of modifications need to make your website. Now, when I was doing this, my primary concern was not to make it do everything or to make it the best thing in the universe. My primary concern was to make it easy. I want someone to say, oh, this is terribly easy to do. I did it in like 4 hours, and I'm done. So we're going to go through the steps that it takes in order to actually do this. First, of course, is preparation. We're going to learn how to do sign-in, association, recovery, and then we're going to talk a little bit about the visuals. The first thing, authentication at this point with CardSpace requires the use of SSL. This actually gives us two things. One, it gives us the ability to encrypt things to that relying party or website, because we now have a private or a public key that we can turn around and encrypt things to. The second thing it does, it also gives us the ability to identify who it is we're talking to. That is, I know who's going to be on the other side of that wire because there's been a third party actually validate who that is. Now, you might be thinking, well, anybody can get an SSL certificate. Well, that's true. So that's why the CA form actually came up with an additional type of certificate recently that went live this year. And you've probably seen it on sites like eBay, where it's called a extended validation certificate. And in IE7, you'll see an experience similar to this, where the title bar or the address bar goes green, and you'll actually see information about who it is you're talking to. And that's because the CA has done additional effort to validate who that is and where they are, and give the user the ability to sue, and provides the user a level of, a level of indemnification against them disappearing from business because they were fraudulent. And so if you actually click on the who it is, you get the website identification, which you'll see who's saying it, who it is, and you'll find out where they are and their address, their state, their country, and know that that's actually been physically verified, not just by, oh yeah, send me a fax and that'll be that. And of course, if you dig down inside the information, you can actually find those same fields in the subject inside the certificate. Now, this information we use in order to identify who we're talking to at a cryptographic level. So now let's talk about what we have to do in order to store information in order to use this. Most of you are thinking maybe you got to store a whole lot of data or it's got to be complicated, and it really isn't. You need to add one simple little table to your database, and that's basically a table of information cards that links back to the user table. That's it. So we can store information. So we store this thing called a unique ID, and then we can store the user ID, which is the foreign key back to your user table, and the PPID and the issuer identity. Now, that issuer identity you can store in a variety of ways. You can store something that relates to their certificate. You can have another database if you wanted that stored those identities and more information about them. In this particular case, we're just going to actually store a hash of the public key. Now, the unique ID that you see up there is actually a combination of the PPID and that issuer identity. And the reason I use that is because the toolkit that I've written for Windows actually generates that for you automatically, and so you can, with a single operation, just look that up and you can have that person's account and know that it's been validated, it actually came from that issuer, and that it is the same person that you saw the last time. So the sign-in experience starts with performing some client-side detection to determine whether the client supports information cards. And you'll notice I actually say information cards rather than just CardSpace, because information cards are not going to be just on Windows, as we'll see later. So the first thing we do is we run this little client detection script, which actually detects the identity selector, or the support for information cards. And so based on whether the browser actually supports those, we can say, oh, we can show them a web page that has support for cards, or one that doesn't, and one that does. And what do those look like? Well, there's the one with the sign-in. So you'll see this button, this rather large button, that says, sign in with your information card. So this tells the user what it is they're going to do. Below that are a couple of links, one that allows them to start the recovery process, don't have your card, and then something that says, what is this? Because if they do support it because they downloaded the right components, but they have no idea what it is, we still want to be able to educate them. Now, yes, it is your website, and you have the ability to decide if and when you want to have these types of things on there. But if you actually believe that you're providing value to your customers by providing support for information cards, you probably want to be able to allow them to learn about it. So, and then below that, you can say, oh, or you can use your existing credentials for systems that don't support it, for users who don't want that kind of protection, or whatever. And the other option, or the other side of that coin is that when they don't support information cards. And so we actually tested a lot of stuff around this with users in user testing about showing the card, the same button, but we've disabled it. And in this case, there's a why can't I use this, which will allow you to help train your users to understand, well, what is this and why would I even want to care? It's grayed out so it doesn't get bothersome or anything like that. And again, it's optional as to how exactly you want to present that. So the sign-in process starts, of course, with the user choosing to either sign in with the button or sign in using a username and password. So let's assume they're going to go and sign in with information cards, because I'm sure you all know how to do it with the password thing. So the first thing we do is that once we get this token from the user, it has their PPID, we validated the signature, and so we attempt to look up the account. Is there an account associated with this ID? Sure. Okay, we sign the user in. Well, how do we do that? We've already been doing this for 25 years. We set the same cookie or whatever, and you continue the process, and you're welcome back. The rest of your website does not even need to know, understand, change one bit whatsoever. This should insert itself just into the point where they can sign in. Once that's been done, the system works exactly the same. So the other option, of course, is no, and we're going to associate that with an existing account, or create a new account, or choose a different card, which you saw on this little window when I presented a card it had never seen before. So sign-in leads, of course, to association, and that association is either done with associating with an existing account. So that begins the recovery scenario. Now, hang on a second. If I've never actually put the card in before, how can we call it a recovery scenario? Because essentially it's the same thing. I already have an account. I want to recover access to it. I've provided you with a different card. You validate that I own that account, and you allow me to have access to that. The second thing we do is, obviously, account creation. And then you can choose to send a different card, which, why would you? Okay. So existing accounts. When you go to associate with an existing account, we give them the option of using username and password or proof of that account. Now, everybody has different ideas of what proof of an account means. How many people have had a website ask for their mother's maiden name or where they were born or things like that? You know what the really part about all that information is? Is those aren't even shared secrets. Those are worse than the passwords you actually gave the first time. That's shared information. Actually, it's information, period. The more websites that find out your mother's maiden name, the less valuable that information actually becomes. And when companies like credit card companies and whatnot actually use that as well as a form of authentication, because when you call them up and you say, I lost my card, I need to, what's your mother's maiden name? Oh, they're actually asking for the same information as I just gave to that website over there. That's not good. So in any event, you need some sort of proof of account. You need to be able to demonstrate that I do indeed own that account. The most common way we see today is, of course, send me an email. But there is additional things, and I'm not going to tell you have to use the email route. If you've got something else that works, then that's fantastic. So, of course, if they use the username and password, we just get them to authenticate using that and proceed. If it's the proof of account via email, we send them the email confirmation. They come back, blah, blah, blah. So I'm just going to show you a couple of bits of UI here. Again, you may access your existing account with one of the following methods. So use your username and password. This is allowing them to send that information in. What happened to the other piece? Oh, I must have missed one. Anyway, I was just showing the website. So now we've got association, what we also call with account creation. So there's the explicit step, and that is I'm going to actually click on a button that says I want to sign up. Or the implicit step, which is I'm going to create a new account because I presented you a card and it told me I didn't have an account. In the end, they're exactly the same sort of things. And so in this case, you would perform optionally perform any validation steps. That is, I can send them an email, and then I've got a validated email. I could, contact some other broker and find out some other information about them or whatever. In this particular case, it's not even necessary to actually validate things. A large number of websites actually allow you to create the account and start working without any validation at all. This accelerates the user's ability to buy. So once we've passed that optional set of steps, we sign the user in, and they're in to the website instantaneously. We're going to get to that in a bit. You'll see. Okay, so there's an example of an email that I've sent round trip. And essentially, in this particular case, I've sent a couple of codes, and they can just click on the link, and it gets them back to the exact same spot they were, except now that I've validated their email. So let's talk about that validation when they come back and why we do that. So they come back, it asks them to represent their card, which seems, at first a bit, monotonous or at least superfluous. But the idea here is that if I present one card the first time, let's say it has my email address of garrett@serac.org, and I come back and then it says, okay, present the other card, and I give them something else, that would allow me to, and if they use the data from the second card, that will allow me to actually take over or create an account with falsely verified credentials. Now, I'm not going to tell you whose websites or what was done, but there's a lot of people at Microsoft who are demonstrating the ability to use information cards, and they wanted to show you how well it worked on other things. So they wrote some PHP and did a whole email verification. And then they actually failed to do that step. So a couple weeks ago, I was validating that they'd actually done all their hard work and ended up stealing accounts from almost everybody. So I think it's very, very critical that you do use this to actually validate that they are the same person that came the first time. So now account maintenance. So by having this extra table rather than just a couple of columns onto my existing user database, this provides me of a couple of things. One, it doesn't touch any data or any stored procedures or anything that I've used so far. I can minimize all these changes to this other table. Additionally, I can have a one-to-many relationship with cards to accounts, a many-to-one relationship with cards to accounts. This allows users to present a card at work and a card at home and be able to use those without having to transport them. which is an option with CardSpace. You can actually export your cards and import them somewhere else, put them on a USB stick or whatever. But the ability to actually have multiple cards per account is much, much, much more convenient. So recovery. So there's this little tiny tag underneath the button that says, don't have your card. And the great part about this is depending on what the user's thinking, those words have a different effect. If the user is thinking, geez, I don't even know what that is, you can take them to a place where they can still do anything, but under a different set of text. If they're thinking, no, I've lost it, they start with the idea that it's recovery. So we go there and it says, don't have your card. So you have several options for accessing an account. So in this particular case, you can show a card you have. So if they've already got if they've got another card, they can just show that. And they go, oh, OK. And again, this jumpstarts the process exactly the same way as if they came in under any other mechanism. If they've never seen the account before, we allow them to create one with another click. If they have an account and they have the same email address, we allow them to recover it. Or if they don't have their account, they can enter an email address or username and password to access their account. And the email address, of course, we do that round-trip verification. So let's talk quickly about the visuals. So we've been working really hard to make an industry-standard graphic that people will be able to use for their information cards on their website. That process is still going on. It takes a little bit of time, and we should have started a little sooner, but we have that process underway. So Microsoft right now is using this as a placeholder graphic, this nice little color head inside the card gift. Now this graphic here is actually very reminiscent of the default card graphic inside of CardSpace itself. So people will understand what it is they're looking at. And of course, there's the what is this? And this allows you to have a page that you can post to that basically explains what it is they're talking about. And we have some standard text that we have that you can put on your own website. Or if you don't want to use that, we're going to put up a web page where you can actually just direct users. And so let's talk quickly about passive notification. Now, I said it took me about 6 months to come up with this stuff, and you guys are going like, this guy's an idiot. There's no way it takes 6 months to make websites look like this. Well, and it really didn't, but we went through a lot of stages where we made certain assumptions, and we found out that, well, that was really hard for users to understand. One of the things that happened is that when we put brand new users in front of this and asked them to log into a website using an information card, and that's literally all we said. They went down, they sat around, and they looked around, and when they finally found the button to click on, they clicked on the button, they went through the experience, they actually did it, and they get signed in, they're like, I don't know what happened. And they actually felt like they got lost. And the reason is because it was a different type of authentication, and in the short run, they needed a little bit of coaching to tell them, what did I just do? And so therefore, if you notice that when I signed in the one time, or signed up, I actually got a little piece of pop-up toast. And that's what we call passive notification. That is something that will allow the user to understand something without being, a pop-up and saying it's in your way and force you to acknowledge that, which I will admit was my first instinct, and I put that up, and all the users really liked it, and then we had some usability people go, are you stupid? So toast is, of course, the first thing. So I've got some graphics you can use for making nice little toast and some pretty little JavaScript, but since you guys are all like JavaScript aces, that's probably fine. And another kind of passive notification that I made up as well was one that looked suspiciously like the info bar that you see in IE when something goes wrong. Except, of course, I color it nice purple because actually it's indigo. Nobody got that? Come on. OK. So I'm going to actually ask Mike Jones to come on up and talk to you a bit about some more stuff.
Well, thank you, Garrett. I'm here on stage as well with Pat Felstead, who's a partner of ours from Novell. But even before there was a Microsoft-Novell partnership, we were actually doing some joint work with some other open source projects, including the Bandit project, which Pat is a lead of. And as per the question out in the audience about, can you run this on Linux? Well, take it away, Pat.
Well, we all know that we work in these mixed environments with multiple clients, and we also know, being an open source company, that the only way we're going to get adoption of technologies like this is that they are generally available. All of this technology that they've shown you is based on open standards. And so the Bandit project is actually, we're going to show you what we've done with those open standards and how we've created some client technology, some server technology that actually does everything that he just showed you on Windows on your other platforms. However, the guys that work with me on this are not UI guys. They're not great designers. I got some low-level security, super great engineers. And so I know there's a lot of designers out here. I know there's a lot of guys who like to use open source. What we're showing is what that low-level security engineer threw out. But what I'm asking you guys to, if you're an open source program, you know GTK, this whole technology I'm showing is built on that. And if you like to scan, you like to build something, come talk to me. I'll give you a Bandit tag, get you hooked up with the Bandit project, and maybe you could write the next generation for other platforms, a UI for the info card select that I'm going to show you.
And do you want me to do the background now?
Yeah.
Or do you want to do the demos first?
Yeah, we can do it either way.
So obviously, if information cards only worked on Windows, it wouldn't solve the problem. Identity has this interesting property that identity is about connecting yourselves, identifying yourselves to those that are not yourselves. And those that are not yourselves may run different software than you. So, I mean, even if Microsoft had this idea for information cards and built a client for it and maybe some servers, unless there was industry adoption of this, it wouldn't solve the problem. And in fact, identity requires cooperation. So, you know, we won't dwell on a lot of it, but there's lots of proof points out there now that people like Novell, IBM, Sun, Ping Identity, BMC, VeriSign, and I could keep going on, are building interoperable parts for all the platforms, with browser support happening for Firefox, for Safari, and whatnot. And this is, if you will, all fruit of the web services work that we and the rest of the industry have been doing. You know, we were on stage at Java 1 last year. It's not like Sun was saying, well, you should buy Windows. It was Sun saying, you know, our forthcoming Sun Identity Manager is going to interoperate with software like CardSpace and like the software that Pat's going to show you that does this. And the Bandit project, which he's a member of, is building these loosely coupled pieces, components, if you will, which then they've plugged together for anyone to be able to use on any platform for authentication, authorization, audit, filling all the roles in the information card ecology. The client, what we call the identity selector, relying parties, the sites that accept cards, as well as card issuers. It's open to participation by any, and you're also a code contributor to the Higgins project, which is around identity tools as well.
That's right. So one of our charters as being the Bandit project is we're not trying to invent new software. There's lots of software. We're trying to work with other projects as well. And we've actually contributed heavily to a project called the Higgins project. And their goal is to actually create the infrastructure of the identity systems for user-centric, enterprise computing, wherever you may be. And a lot of this code that we're going to show you is actually stuff that the Bandit project's done. Some people at IBM have done, Parity, lots of different companies have gotten together, contributed to the Higgins project, or is being hosted in other places associated with the Higgins project. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over and show you, this is actually a PC that I'm running here that, that's not good. I'm going to show you a PC that's running CardSpace just like Garrett has shown you. This, you're seeing a Joomla relying party site right there. And so we have enabled a Joomla site with PHP code to accept information cards. There's another project called the Pamela project, and the goal of that project is actually create lots of relying party plugins that work with WordPress, Joomla, MediaWiki, things like that you have already. So you can actually just have a component that you just plug into it, and it works with information cards. I'm in IE7 here, running on XP with .NET 3 that has the CardSpace client. If I click here to log into the site, you're going to see what Garrett was showing before. And here's actually a card. This is actually Mike's self-issued card. He exported off his Windows box. We imported it into ours. And we're actually going to do a login to that Joomla site with that card. And you can see here, hey, hi, Mike. You're logged into the site. Now, what if I don't use IE7? And I use Firefox. Well, in combination of another open source project, Perpetual Motion, a guy named Kevin Miller, I think is his name, has written a plugin for Firefox that will invoke Microsoft CardSpace client as well, and I can still be Mike and log into the site, and I'm logged into this site. Now, in the environments you work in, there's going to be other platforms, and I've got on this machine running a virtual image of the SUSE Enterprise, Linux Enterprise server, desktop right here actually, and I have the server running on this machine. And you can see here I'm running a Firefox to the same site, and if I click on, login, I have a new identity selector. Now, as I said before, UI needs some work. I'm hoping someone here will help me out. But we've got people working on it. But there it is. You can see that same self-issued card. You can see some other cards there as well. And if you want to come over to, is it called the lab? Or we will actually, yeah, Sandbox. We'll show you how managed cards work and how we can create new cards and import them into these things. But I can send that card off to that site, and I'm logged in as well. So last but not least, and there's another machine in your environments you see a lot. You've got your Linux, you've got your Windows, but you also have your Macintosh. And so because of some DNS problems I was having, I'm not going to actually show you logging in, but I did get the thing to come up. It's a little slow. But basically it works the same. We've shown it actually several times at other venues. You can see it's the same information. You can select a card, and you can log into the site the exact same way. So this code is open source. It's LGPL or EPL licensed. I think it's dual licensed for both of those. You can build it right now. You can go out there. I can show you exactly where to get it. You can go to bandit-project.org, download the code, build it, anything you want. It's all written in C++. With the GTK UI builder, you can just create your own UIs for it.
Great. Let's thank Pat. So we did the interoperable information cards demo. And again, I'll give a caveat. I wouldn't normally share my identity card with Pat any more than I would normally share my passwords with Pat or with Dale Olds or any of the rest of my friends. But what we were showing was the ability for me as an individual to go from a Windows box to a Linux box to the Mac and get the same experience and use the same cards for the same purposes, giving me portability. So what did you just see? You saw multiple platforms, browsers, and identity selectors all signing into the same site in the same way, using the same protocols. Even though there was no code in common between what you did and we did, we're just cooperating at the protocol and file format level. Unsurprisingly, at a Microsoft-sponsored conference, you saw MIX07 on Windows. And then thanks to the Perpetual Motion project and some other contributors, you saw Firefox. Then you saw Firefox and Bandit on Linux. That's right. And you saw it on the Mac. So it is all happening. And we're demonstrating interoperability and industry adoption around this. So let me give it back to Garrett.
Howdy. Thanks. Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Pat. Okay, so I'm here to plug my my upcoming book, which I actually go into greater detail about an awful lot of more things, called Understanding CardSpace, and it should be out later this summer. And this talks actually about CardSpace in a lot more aspects. Here I've just shown you how to use it in a hybrid authentication on a website, but you'll also be able to find out, well, what does it take to become an identity provider and have cards issued by other people and things like that. It goes into a lot of detail. And I'm writing it with two other people from Microsoft. One is Vittorio Bertucci, and the other was Caleb Baker. And Caleb and I are both on the CardSpace team, and Vittorio is a technical evangelist or architect evangelist. Oh, see, I did wrap it. Here's a few links that I can point you towards. The first is our CardSpace website, where you can find out more. You can get some code samples. You can find some tutorials. And here's actually where we just posted about a couple of hours ago the deployment guide. What do we call it?
It's a CardSpace deployment guide.
Yeah. So it actually details out exactly what we're talking about here. And in the next 48 hours or so, as soon as I can get through the code signing process, I'm going to actually have the code that goes behind all of this stuff up there as well, so you'll be able to use that, look that. Now, I have some code which does everything for ASP.NET. So basically, you get it all. You just plug in the places, and you're done. I have some code which is just for the client side, and we call that the client kit or the information card client kit, or something like that. Anyway, it's designed to have it's got some HTML and it's got some JavaScript, and it will do some of the heavy lifting for you that you need to do in the browser. So if you want to just be able to plug that in, and you have some back-end code, and you can find code on the internet for doing the back-end server stuff in Java and PHP. I think there's more too. Second link there, of course, is my blog, fearthecowboy.com. And the last one there is thebanditproject.org, which is the Bandit Project. So now we have the opportunity to have a question and answer period. And I've left lots of time so that we can actually handle everything you guys want to know. Howdy.
Question I have is, how does the CardSpaces work with OpenID?
How does CardSpace work with OpenID? So you might have heard that actually, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, let me talk to that. As we announced at RSA, we're cooperating with some of the OpenID architects to help them solve some of the phishing problems that are inherent in the OpenID protocol, such that in particular, if you're a relying party in the OpenID sense, you tell it, oh, this is the URL of my OpenID identity provider. If it's a good site, it'll direct you to your OpenID identity provider. If it's a bad site, it could direct you to something that looks a lot like it but will steal your password. They know that. So many of the OpenID architects are working with us to, among other things, marry CardSpace into many of the OpenID providers so that one of the choices, and it is about consumer choice, that people will have is signing into your OpenID with a CardSpace card or with an information card rather than with the password. So remember when Garrett was talking crypto with you about a half hour ago about generating a different PPID for each site that you log into? Well, if you get tricked into going to the wrong site, yeah, you've logged into the wrong site, but you didn't give them the shared secret. And so that's one of the ways that we and the OpenID folks are cooperating, just like we're cooperating with lots of other relying parties to give them better authentication, whether it's online banking, whether it's major websites, whether it's blogging sites, you name it. And this is all about convergence and cooperation.
Along that line, one of the things we showed about a month ago was we actually took an information card, and we showed you these self-asserted cards or personal cards. There's also a thing called a managed card, and you can pass in usernames and passwords for that. You can use smart cards and other things. But we actually created so you could actually put your OpenID and the user there, and your password to that thing, and then the card would log you in automatically without the site actually even being enabled for CardSpace. I mean, and
That would be a personal card that would act as an OpenID?
Well, what you could do then is you could associate a personal card with your managed card, and you could do single sign-on to an OpenID IDP that wasn't even CardSpace enabled.
So a lot of cool convergence stuff happening.
Anybody else? Is there any integration story with Active Directory?
Well, what do you know? It would shock you to learn if I was to say that we're not eventually going to ship a server product that'll support this. And it's been on the roadmap ever since we started the CardSpace work, that we would ship a version of Active Directory that would make it possible for people to use their corporate IDs that are stored in Active Directory through information cards. So, I mean, one scenario that you could imagine is if I'm a Microsoft employee and I then have an AD card that corresponds to my identity as an employee, so mbj@microsoft.com and all of that. Well, I could use it at sites like the Microsoft Company Store to authorize purchases, and I could use it explicitly at sites like my 401k provider eventually to say, yes, Microsoft vouches that I'm really an employee. All of that's good. That's sort of classic federation, but with the user in the middle. But if you expand your thinking a little bit, there's lots of ad hoc federation that enables too. Imagine a BarnesandNoble.com was to say, in their own self-interest, I'd like to give every Novell employee a book discount. Then, if Pat's directory product supported information cards, he could prove that he's a Novell employee to Barnes & Noble, even though Novell hadn't federated with them in a classic sense. Barnes & Noble would check the signature that Novell gave and said, yep, I'm vouching for Pat, and they could offer the discount. So this is what we call user-centric or ad hoc federation, as opposed to classic federation, where the two site administrators, had to not only do a technology link up, but a business deal to enable it. And we will be doing a consumer technology preview, CTP release of the next version of the ADFS product, ADFS v2, in the forthcoming months. In fact, that's one of the key features that will be in that product. And we want you to all install it, play with it, tell us what we're getting right, tell us where we got to make it better.
And you can actually, sorry.
Go ahead.
You can actually do it right now. Part of the Higgins project we've contributed is basically an STS, which generates the tokens, and it talks to an LDAP server. Active Directory could just be plugged in right there, and you can generate cards, manage cards right now that'll work with open source.
That guidance that you've been working on these projects, are they available now on the site?
The document is available right this moment already at cardspace.netfx3.com. The bits, the actual code and whatnot, it's going to take me another day or two. I underestimated how long it takes to get code signed at Microsoft. So I vastly underestimated how long it takes. So it's hopefully going to be the next 48 hours so that I actually get those things up there. And so you'll be able to actually install that Fabricam Friends demo, and it's got the two kits, the one for ASP.NET 2.0 and the one for just HTML.
Small detail, the page with the account maintenance was a little bit scary.
Yeah, it was a little bit scary, and I realized.
IDs and
You're right, and that one, and obviously this is actually a work in progress. Mix came when Mix came, and I was literally working up until, well...
I'll attest to that.
Late Friday.
For weeks.
Actually, I've been just killing myself, and as it is, I actually acknowledge that the account maintenance page is actually atrocious. The only reason I have that one the way it is just so that we can quickly identify them. Ideally, you would provide more contextual information about, when did they use that card last, or more details from it, because obviously it's probably a lot more valuable if they understand which one is which. But very good point.
Yeah, indeed, I'll agree with Garrett on the deployment guide. We view that as a living document, that as we get community experience, when you try a deployment and then you tell us, our user experience was that this scared users in this way, or this could be smoother. We want to incorporate that and accumulate these best practices. Again, it's only because we did user testing on the earlier versions of the sample sites that Garrett did that we learned that, for instance, many people have so associated logging in with typing a username and password that the idea that you could log in without having typed that just never crossed their minds. Yes, they'd signed in, but they didn't know it. Hence the little, what do you call the toast? The toast, the purple toast, saying, congratulations, you've signed in with an information card, so that people are helped through this process of learning. That's right.
Yeah, it was.
That's right.
Absolutely.
That's right. So we're trying to put best guidance out there for people, but we're going to accumulate it as adoption happens and get that out.
Sure, go ahead.
You were talking about paradigm shift here to use common protocol for internet authentication. But to me, you've tied the internet authentication to client machines, right? What about in public libraries? My friends borrowing my machine, they're gonna go back to the old-fashioned username and password box. Haven't you duplicated the authentication process here rather than integrating it?
Yeah, you can take that one, Mike.
Okay. Well, it's certainly going to be the case for some time that information card support is not ubiquitous. And so it's just a reality that we're going to have to support some of the, we as an industry, not we, Microsoft, but all of us are going to have to support existing modes of authentication, be it username, password, or one-time password credentials or smart cards. I mean, all of these things, we're not replacing anything. We're adding a potentially better experience around all of those. So for the people who do have machines, or that you're going to a machine where you can use these, it's a safer experience, it's an easier experience. I don't have to type a password, I don't even have to remember a password. Yes, for sites or for uses where you don't have that installed yet, there's going to be a transition period. It'll last a while, and that's fine.
Good.
How is the CardSpace portability stuff going? Carrying around your cards on a memory stick, or even your whole CardSpace on a memory stick?
Well, indeed, as we didn't get everything done in V1. Shocking, isn't it?
We beat them too.
Yeah, in fact, it's true. As a focus going forward, one of the key features that we do want to look at and are working with others in the industry on is portability stories that are more easy to use than putting your card on a USB device and moving it to another machine. If we had more time, I'd take out a phone just like this one and show you a preview of CardSpace running on Windows Mobile 6 or 5 as well. And again, that's not a product commitment, but it is a statement of direction that you can, if you live your life on the phone, you can do all that on the phone and have your cards here. But what's even cooler than that is if I'm willing to carry the phone, but I don't want to carry a stupid USB device, I could carry the cards here, pair the phone with the PC, use the good screen and the good keyboard on the PC, but have my identities here, and yet have the cryptography happen here. So even if I walk up to a hacked internet kiosk, if I use information cards there, unlike the keystroke logger case, if I use information cards there, what's passing through that hacked PC is cryptographically signed material that's not any more visible to that PC than it's usable, visible on the network. And Pat, talk about the demo you guys did at BrainShare.
We showed, so you saw that Linux selector, and if you remember, there was a little thing that said file system. Well, there's a pull down that we wrote a Bluetooth connector. So basically, you keep your, like Mike was saying, you keep your encrypted cards here. This becomes your wallet. You walk up to the kiosk, it recognizes, there's a machine, right? There's a Bluetooth device. Do you want to authenticate to it? You pair to it, and there your cards show up in that selector. You select a gun, it never got transferred to the client. It's always with you wherever you go. So you got to see the paradigm and how this is could change the way we do everything, even from credit card transactions to everything we do. And
just one more follow-up thought to that. Another option that a lot of people have asked us about, and you guys have demonstrated as well, is, well, couldn't a web service that I trust store my cards up in the cloud for me? And these same protocols that you could use to get your phone off, or the cards off the phone or off of a smart card device, could also be used to go up to the cloud. So again, I don't want to gloat too much, but it's the magic of interoperable web services. The fact that it's all interop at the wire level makes this all possible. There's a question over here.
I think you were next.
Oh, yeah, I was talking about the interim period you mentioned where we can take both traditional form and this. You want to be a website seeking identity provider like Live ID. Is there some strategy for how that would be a migration to CardSpace?
So it sounds like you're asking whether Live ID is going to be supporting CardSpace.
I guess Live ID is an identity provider, and they could eventually create a card, I guess.
They exist as an identity provider today without CardSpace, obviously. And I would be, again, surprised if that didn't happen.
Well, the Live ID team has already publicly said that, that just like the OpenID folks are going to do, the Live ID folks are going to accept information cards to sign into your Live ID. And so, again, that makes it a safer sign-in experience no matter where you are. Does that get at your question, or did you have another question?
I think so. It's just wondering whether the user can seamlessly switch from using copying a Live ID sign into using a card.
That is the intent. That would be, it should be possible for them to just upgrade to that and just never even...
Right, but no future announcement yet. Watch this space, right?
Going back to your analogy of having your
You can put a pin on it. We didn't show it.
Yeah, so the card store that's on the PC, and again the ones with the phones, and pretty much all the card stores have share a similar feature set, and that is that you can actually pin protect any additional card. The difference between this pin and, of course, the one that the password you're sending across is that that secret isn't shared. Additionally, people have actually, I'm surprised no one talked about asked that question yet. I was hoping I was baiting people, but the fact that these cards are stored on my PC. Well, what happens if my PC is lost? Well, the card store is actually encrypted twice, and optionally the third time. The first is with the machine key. The second is with the user's session key. And so if you're not even logged in, the session key doesn't exist, and so you can't be co-opted. And finally, you have the option to pin protect your cards as well, which gives it a third level of encryption.
Is there a revocation?
So with managed cards, revocation is easy because you contact the managed card provider. With self-issued cards, we're actually still working on what kinds of mechanisms outside of CardSpace you could use to say, oh, revoke my cards. At this point in time, there's no mystical, magical revoke those cards. However, if your PC is stolen and you've either pin protected your cards, or even if you've logged out and they don't have that password either, then they can't access those cards. Because try as they might, they're not going to recreate that key without you signing into Windows Auth.
Let me give you one more level of technical detail. If you're going to an identity provider to prove that you're the card holder for a managed card, a card issued by a third party, there's actually 4 technologies that we support out of the box to prove that you're the card holder. One of them is you can use a self-issued card to say, I'm the holder of this managed card. Another is we'll support any MIX07 certificate, so that if you're in an environment like a corporate environment or a government environment where you already have a smart card or USB device with a cert on it, then all of a sudden that could enable your corporate info card. As per the question earlier, once we get Active Directory and Sun gets Identity Manager and you guys do your work at Novell, et cetera, you'll be able to use a Kerberos ticket, which is your corporate sign-in credential, to prove that I'm the card holder for this card. And then finally, we do support proving that you're a card holder with a username and password. You might scratch your head and think, well, why is that any better then? You've just reduced the password case to the password case, but you haven't. A password typed into a website, into a browser, running as you, could actually go anywhere that the browser redirected you to. And that's part of the vulnerability in a lot of these web-only single sign-on solutions. Whereas a password typed into an information card, you're typing that into a place that's pre-configured to only send that password to a pre-configured endpoint. Encrypted. And it's encrypted, and you're not typing it into a login session running as you're typing it into a system service. A system service that you can think of as being sort of as distinct from the normal experience as what happens when you type Control-Alt-Del. You just get to a different place. You can't do much there, but you do important things there.
Any more questions? So the PPID is actually generated from this thing called the master key. So each card has a master key. Right? So when I go to site number 1, I get their certificate, their SSL certificate, and I use elements from that certificate and this master key, and I generate a PPID for use with them. I can use that same card at another site, and it generates different information and a different PPID. So the great part is, no, you don't need to have additional cards. You can have one card and use it multiple places. Even better, that these sites behind your back can't compare PPIDs and go, is this the same guy as it was here? I have no idea. Same Bob Smith? Who knows? There's no way for them to know because the PPIDs are completely and totally different. Additionally, even the RSA key pair that's used to sign the messages that you sent, that are sent from your identity selector to that website are different. So they can't even compare it via that. So no, you can actually have just one card and use it in many, many places. That's a fantastic question. Identity providers actually... Oh, he wants to know whether there's a criteria that you would have to decide whether you want to be an identity provider or not. So one of the biggest things is, do you want to federate identities? Do you want somebody else to log into something using an identity they got from you? Good examples of this in the real world is, I want to go and buy some beer. I need to be able to prove that I'm over 21. So I have an identity that's been issued to me by the state of Washington that has my birth date on it. So natural identity providers in the real world should be natural identity providers in the online world. Now, that doesn't mean that you couldn't be. I mean, there's a whole host of reasons why you would or wouldn't, and some of those we actually talk about on the website and upcoming in my book. But well, a bank, your company, your
Credit cards.
Your credit cards, things like that. Those anything that actually I mean, think about what are the cards in your wallet now, right? And that's a great example because
the AAA,
yeah,
the
AAA,
clubs that you're a member of.
Costco even. Now, Costco, of course, you could, if you were going to use Costco online, you could just use your a self-issued card. And there's no reason why they wouldn't, except for the one thing is that they like, and the reason they put a card in your wallet now is so that they have a branding experience. So, I mean, even that's a valid reason to become an identity provider if you want someone to see your fancy schmancy card.
Is that what you all are hoping that happens in the community, that there becomes more natural identity providers rather than everyone becoming one?
Yes.
That's
yeah,
right.
When you become an identity provider, that's really a commitment to those users using those cards as well, right? If I started up, Garrett's identity card service, and my uptime was flaky, and I wasn't willing to ensure that was going to be around for a long time, I think a lot of people would get kind of miffed at that. So I would think that given the difficulty that it is to actually implement those technologies from scratch, people will probably not just do them on a whim. I mean, if they do, well, that's great too.
But as a criteria, it's a business decision. It's not a technology decision, right? So do I want to say, do I want to have relationships with users that I allow them to use other places or that I encourage them to use other places? We're saying nothing about who should do that, who charges who, whether it's all free. If you will, both Pat and Garrett and I, we're providing plumbing. The other question that always gets asked is, well, how is this like and not like Passport, right? Passport, Microsoft thought a long time ago, there's not an easy way to log into all these websites. Maybe we'll provide one and everybody will come use it. Well, but we were the identity provider, and we didn't ask questions like, do all the banks want Microsoft to be the identity provider, or does the government of France want us to be the identity provider for their citizens? Well, no, they didn't want anybody else to do that. They wanted to do it. No one party is going to be the world's identity provider. This is all, if anything, 360 from that, where it's open protocols. If I want to make a go at being an identity provider, knock yourself out. If you want to accept cards from others, knock yourself out. We love seeing already at the beginning of this the creative uses that people are coming up with. There's a company called My Virtual Model in Montreal that has as customers Sears and Land's End. And if you go to landsend.com, or Sears, you can try on clothes or design kitchens, and they give you 3D models showing what you would look like in the clothes. And apparently a lot of the ladies not only have their body model, but they have their idealized body model, the body model that they would like to be trying the clothes on. And they're planning to issue information cards which encapsulate your body model. That's a completely different set of claims than the claims you'd use to make a payment or the claims, that certainly you'd use to log in. But the sky's sort of the limit because we're not saying anything about what the data is being exchanged. Any card that's meaningful between an identity provider and a relying party that you as a customer are willing to use, it's going to happen.
If you have an information card which you've been using, and you want to change some data in the card, will that change the master key and stuff?
No, the data that you can edit in the card does not change the master key. So you can actually update your address and whatnot. And then, one of the questions is, well, what happens when I post that card to a website and they get it? What are they supposed to do with that? And that really depends on how the website feels about updating that data. One model is to just, if they change information that they request, they can say, oh, I noticed you changed your address. Did you want me to update your profile? Or even better yet, rather than even storing their address, is just leave it alone, right? The less information, the less information you actually store, the less liability you're going to have if you ever get attacked or somebody, even physically steals your database servers or whatever. The less information you have, the less likely you can be held accountable for something. So, I mean, you got to, you know, that's another thing to think about. We are just about out of time here. So
4 minutes left, I guess.
4 minutes left, and so we're going to actually, there's a, oh,
Can you have it use the info card to work as an auto sign-in so you don't have to select one?
so CardSpace doesn't at this point in time allow you to have it auto-select the card. It does actually, when you go into when it brings up CardSpace, it does select the last card you used at that site for you, and it actually separates the ones you've ever used at that site than ones you haven't used. So it actually helps you in that regard, but it doesn't automatically post the token. In V1, we were very, very cautious about, you know, automatically doing absolutely anything, because for CardSpace, the most important thing is that the user is in control of their identity at all times. And so if they don't want to send that token there, they don't have to. In the managed card experience, once I go and get a token from the identity provider, and I've got all the data and I know what they're about to tell the relying party, the data has to go through the user's hands, so they have the ability to go, you know what, I'm not sending that. You know, if I have a card that has something about my credit rating, and I look and go, oh, too many bankruptcies, maybe I won't say anything, I can have the option of not sending any information along at all.
But that's a user experience choice that, you know, I don't know what your selector's going to do.
We've actually had, Novell has lots of products, one of them is resource management. And we've had those guys come in and say, well, what we need is a selector that we can apply policy to. And so this is actually where we say, well, it's open source. You guys can do anything you want with it. Build it, add your policy, and ship it. Now, there's concern there. Will it be validated through security processes and all that kind of stuff? And there's actually some work going on with the Burton Group and an organization called OSIS to do validation and security verification that all the components that making up this environment are actually secure and work together.
Okay, so there is the other session I wanted to mention was a panel on identity that's going on next door right after this one. So if you actually have more questions or some more thoughts about identity, you can actually come and hang out there, and you can see, who is it, Kim Cameron and...
I think Scott Cantor, who's one of the SAML architects, and some other luminaries in the identity space. So come hang with us some more. Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you.
And thank you, Pat, very much.
Thank you, Pat.